Not a lot of people know this, but PhD students actually make money. We get what's called a stipend. And I honestly didn't understand how the PhD stipend works until I was already a couple years into the PhD. So I made this video to help you fully understand where the PhD stipend comes from so you're better informed. The first place that it can come from is your department. So for example, I'm doing a PhD in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. So therefore I could potentially be paid by the Biomedical Engineering department. However, this is very rare. Typically, if your PhD program has this thing called rotations, where your first couple quarters you rotate in a lab for each quarter so that you get the experience of working in a lab before you actually match with your advisor. Rotations are typically paid for by your department. So that's typically your first 2 quarters or maybe your first 1 quarter of funding during your PhD will come from the department. The next source of funding that you can get is something called a GSR. And this might be different depending on the school that you're in, but essentially what that stands for is Graduate Student Researcher. So you actually get an appointment by your department and you have to sign a contract to be a graduate student researcher for the quarter. Essentially your job is to do research. You're essentially an employee of the university doing research under your professor as part of your degree requirements. And this GSR appointment covers your tuition and your stipend. And it's literally your job to do research. So in my department, this is typically what most students are on. If you get a grant, typically your grant money pays for you to be a GSR. The third source of funding is a TA-ship. So typically if you have less funding or if you don't have as much funding, or maybe your department or your advisor maybe doesn't have an active grant, or maybe you're in a field where this is more common, but you can also do a TA-ship. And typically TA-ship pays a little bit more than the GSR, but it comes with additional responsibilities. So typically it's a little bit more work and a little bit more time than being a GSR, because your job is not only to do research, your job is also to be a teaching assistant. So if you've ever taken classes in college, you have your TAs who sometimes actually teach the whole class, who grade your homework, et cetera, right? So TAing has a varying, it could be very little work or it could be a lot of work. You're essentially teaching the whole class. The caveat is you're still expected to do research while you're a TA. The fourth source of funding is a fellowship. So typically you have to apply for a fellowship, but sometimes you don't, to a fellowship. And it's like an external source that pays you. And fellowships, there's two different types of them. There's internal fellowships, so this is school dependent. Sometimes your school or department will have a pool of money that is allocated to a fellowship, and then students within that school or department will be able to apply and get that money. Or there's an external fellowship, so either it's from the government or some other company or external source. So these are things like the NSF GFRP, the NIH F31, the T32 programs. These are programs that you can apply for to get funding from the government. In summary, those are the 4 different ways that you actually get your PhD stipend, and I hope this video was informative for you.